Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our webinar today, Increasing Family Engagement in Children's Learning Through Coaching, a conversation for early childhood educators. My name is Rosie O'Brien Wojtek, and I'm an Assistant Executive Director at the Connecticut Association of Schools. We at CAS are very excited to collaborate with the Office of Early Childhood, the Connecticut State Department of Education, and the Regional Education Service Center's RESC Alliance to support the needs of all of Connecticut's youngest learners, including children with special needs and other vulnerable populations, by sharing with you the most current information as well as research and best practices for early childhood education. There's so much to think about as we design and implement teaching and learning during this 2021 school year, especially for our youngest students across the state. So we're really glad that you've joined us again today. Just a couple of quick reminders. Everyone's been muted to begin with, but once you get into the breakout rooms, please unmute yourself to talk with each other. If possible, please turn your video on, as it's nice to be able to see everyone, especially when you're working in small groups. When you're working as a whole group, you may ask questions in the chat or raise your hand with the button at the bottom of the screen to be recognized. Please use the chat feature to ask questions, share ideas, and let us know if you have experienced any technical problems during the Zoom meeting, as we will be monitoring the chat. However, when you're in the breakout rooms, the chat feature is only seen by the people in your breakout rooms. If you have questions or need help when you're in the breakout room, please use the help button and one of the hosts will respond. This webinar is being recorded, but only during the whole group activities. We're unable to record the small group conversations during the breakout portion of the webinar. However, the rest of the webinar will be recorded and will be posted for future viewing. So please be sure to share the link to this webinar with your colleagues once it's posted on the CAS, OEC, CSDE, and RESC websites. Again, I would like to welcome and thank you all for joining us today. It's now my pleasure to introduce our facilitator for this continued conversation, the Director of Young Children and Families at Learn, Carol Glenn. Welcome, Carol.
Thanks, Rosie. Good afternoon. It's really great to have all of you here with us. I know it's the end of yet another long day, and you're probably exhausted, but we appreciate your choosing to spend some time with us this afternoon. Our conversation today is about the power of coaching. Just as sort of a little bit of context, this conversation is a similar conversation to the one we had last week with administrators, talking about how they can support you as classroom teachers in implementing a coaching model. One of the reflections last week from administrators was wondering if teachers had a sense that they needed permission from their administrator to use this approach. So just so you all know, we heard that from administrators that they're wondering if teachers feel like they need permission to do this. And so clearly it's something on the administrator's mind. They also some of the wonder was also what administrators understand about high quality early childhood instruction and how much they understand about what it really looks like when it's implemented. And the discussion we had was around making sure that administrators understand that implementing a coaching model is far more developmentally appropriate than trying to replicate a classroom experience on Zoom. And so when a teacher is asked to say, well, you have your children for 2.5 hours a day, you need to have them sitting in front of Zoom for 2.5 hours, we know that's not developmentally appropriate. So I think helping the administrators to understand that as well helps move this along for you. So today we are going to be talking about how we can use coaching to support all children's learning, to support meeting IEP goals for children with IEPs, for how to engage families and childcare providers in a team approach, because we know that some children, when they're not in in-person learning, are with a community-based early childhood provider. And so we need to access that and leverage those teachers as allies and as part of our team as we're implementing this approach. And also supporting professional development around coaching. So the guiding principles of the Connecticut Early Learning and Development Standards remind us that families are the primary caregivers and educators for their children. We always say they're the first and best teacher. And so now we're actually putting that into practice. We also know that from the guiding principles that parents and families are critical partners in all learning environments. So we know, in addition, that children don't learn in isolation. They don't learn skills in isolation. They learn skills best when they are integrated into their play experiences and within the relationship of context, the context of relationships, and through active exploration. In the early childhood classroom, we support relationships with and among children throughout the day. We intentionally embed learning into the daily routines. For example, upon arrival, children use verbal and nonverbal communication to greet the child and others. We can support executive functioning skills such as working memory by helping children remember where to put their belongings when they arrive. We also help them develop their fine motor skills as they manipulate fasteners when they're dressing to go outside or when they're using the toilet. These are all intentionally supported with the goal of generalizing those skills across all environments. The ways in which children learn are still the same. They still learn through active exploration. They still learn integrated across interest areas, across all times of the day. What has changed is the environment. Our responsibility always has been to ensure positive learning outcomes for children. The shift to remote learning has just forced us to shift our practice in ways we've never imagined. And now this really has the power to transform our instruction and our learning practices. So through the cycle of intentional teaching, we know that teachers are continually engaged in a cycle of observing, assessing, and planning and implementing throughout all across their the environment at school. This all happens within the context of the early learning and development standards, children's interests, families, and the cultural and community context. In our new normal, families and the responsive relationships we have with families are more important than ever, as is the cultural and community context as the children's learning environment. Those are even more important than they ever have been before. So I'm now going to transition things over to my colleague, Judy Courteau, who is a consultant with EdAdvance, and she's going to talk to you about coaching a little bit.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you, teachers and related staff, for being here today. I'm just going to briefly do an outline of what coaching is. And when I finish that, I'd like you to go into the chat box and just indicate with a yes or a no as to whether you currently use coaching as a strategy for supporting families and students and other adults that you're working with. So you may have heard of practice-based coaching, which is a coaching approach that is used by Head Start. Those of you who are familiar with birth to three throughout your transitions between birth to three and the school are probably aware that birth to three also uses a coaching approach to support the development of young children. So what coaching is it really is a set of evidence-based practices that recognize that what the parent or caregiver is already doing is where we begin to build upon and build that adult's learning about how to better support their child by developing the adult's skill. So there's an assumption here that the adult has the competencies and the skills to be able to support the child, whether they're the caregiver, whether they're the family child care provider, a relative, center-based teacher. What they're doing already, because we know children are learning constantly, is where we begin with them. So it builds on their competencies. And it's also responsive to the needs and the priorities of the person who we're supporting. So it's very important that we understand that one of the foundational beliefs of coaching is understanding that that individual really has the competence in order to support the child's learning. So we know that it results in improved early childhood outcomes. We have evidence that supports that with Birth to 3 and with Head Start. It's based again on working with the adult. So we're looking at adult learning principles, which is a shift for us because as early childhood teachers, we're typically in a classroom working with students. So this is a shift. And coaching is also a way to interact with families, teachers, caregivers, and other team members. And it enhances the child's learning and development within the typical activities that are occurring for that child with whatever adult they're with. So previously they were with us in the classroom. Now they're with a different adult, another adult, their parent or someone else in a different environment. So we need to understand what that environment looks like. So this was just really a brief summary of what coaching is. And I'm just curious if you could put into the chat box whether yes, you currently are using a coaching approach or no, you are not. So I see 2 responses so far. I see someone who was attempting to. Yeah. Hi, Kathy. So this really is a shift for us. Hi, Gwyneth. So it's a shift for us in being able to transfer the skills that we typically use with children and transferring those skills to an adult and have them actually support the child in the context of those relationships and those routines. So I'm just,
Judy, can I interrupt for a
yeah,
second?
go ahead.
I think it's also a shift in thinking for families as well. Families are used to sending their child off to school and knowing that their child will be educated at school. And suddenly we're asking them to be far more involved than perhaps they're used to being. So I think it's important to emphasize and remind them and help them understand how competent they really are, but also to focus on the fact that we're not asking them to add something onto their day, but we're asking them to embed some of this learning into what they're already doing with their child.
Thank you, Carol. And that came up last week in our discussion with the principals as well. Do parents know what we're expecting of them? Does the adult that is caring for that child know what we're expecting from them from the public school? If the child has an IEP, what is it that we want them to do? So we need to back up a bit in that understanding because we have to be clear as teachers what it is that we are doing. And I'm going to back up even a little bit more because I just want to share a story with you about my experience of being a preschool special education teacher in a public school. So we're just going to stop the slide show for a moment. And I'm just going to share with you an experience that I had and that I know you have probably experienced as well. So I was in the process of transitioning my students to the bathroom when the principal came into the classroom to observe me. And so she saw what was going on, that we were lining up, we were getting ready to go to the bathroom, and she very politely came over and said to me, "I'll come back when you're teaching." So I see shakes and nodding, and so I think, you know, what occurred to me in that moment was that I realized that the culture and expectation of school really were not in alignment with what I knew were developmentally appropriate experiences, excuse me, for 3 and 4-year-olds. I knew I was intentionally supporting those students. I knew I was focusing on their language skills. I was focusing on their working memory. What do we do first? What do we do next? I was also focusing on their self-help skills. So, and I had intentionally embedded those learning opportunities into every routine that we were involved with. So I knew I was intentionally teaching and instructing my students, but I wasn't sure that the principal knew that. So, and I'll just share with you that, of course, I did succumb to the pressure. And so as we left the classroom, we sang the ABC song so that everyone would know that I was teaching. So I think some of you have that similar experience. So we can go back to the slide. Jean, thank you. So, and we can go on to the next one. So the point I'm making is, unless administrators really understand what instruction looks like in an early childhood classroom, it's going to be very difficult for them to understand how coaching as a process, as a vehicle, can support children in the environment that they're in. So I'm going to talk about the coaching cycle. So I just talked about what coaching is. Now we're going to talk about how to do coaching. So this is the process. This is how it begins. And as Carol shared, we did the same presentation with principals so that they're aware of the process as well. So joint planning begins when we meet with the adult, whether it's the parent, whether it's the teacher at the child care center, whoever the adult is that is going to be working with this child in that relationship. And we begin a conversation about what's working, what's not working. What are your child's challenges? What is your day like? What kind of experiences does your child enjoy? So it begins from that first part of the cycle of really listening to the child care provider or parent and listening to what are the routines that are already going on in that environment with that child, and what are your concerns? What's the child successful with? What does the child need help with? So that's where we begin, and it's an exchange of ideas. And I use the term influence in and influence out. Sometimes we've heard the term push in when we talk about providing services for a child at a child setting that's not in our public school. And I like to use the term influence in and influence out because it's really identifying that we're in a partnership. You have information about this child and how this child learns, and I have information about this child and how this child learns as well. You have additional information, and we exchange that information back and forth. So we really both share what we know. We have the same goal. It's about positive outcomes for the child, but the process really is connecting and building a relationship with the adult. So that's the beginning. The second part of the coaching cycle is observation. And this is where we focus on the adult as a learner. And I'm teaching the adult how to support the child within the routine of the day. So they're already doing something with the child, and I may make some suggestions to add another strategy onto that, or maybe to get closer to the child if they're talking about communication, so that the child can see the adult's mouth. So it's where I work on the skill of the adult, and I may model it with the child, and I may ask the adult to do it with the child so I can see that in practice. So that's the observation piece of it, which is really important to understand that you're building the skill of the adult. And that's the shift for us as teachers, because we're releasing our responsibility, or part of our responsibility, to that adult. And we want to ensure that the adult has the skills in which to do that. The third part is action practice, and that's that deliberate implementation of the plan. And what I like also to say about this plan is that the adult is going to carry out those interventions, those strategies embedded into the daily routines that are happening. So this is going to happen every day, all the time. So numerous opportunities for that child to practice the skill. The fourth part is reflection, and this is where the adult considers do I need some more cues for the child or more prompts, or am I being consistent in how I'm supporting the child in learning this skill? And sometimes that happens in the moment, but it's that adult considering how it's going, and then feedback occurs is when I have a conversation with that adult, and this very much connects to progress monitoring. This is where we start to get data from the teacher or the parent. What progress is the child making? What skill is the child ready for next? What other routines can we build in and add strategies to? So this is, and I hear that a lot from teachers of concern about how they're going to measure the progress of children. So here's an opportunity in which to do that. And then we begin again, the cycle continues to go. So the result of this is that the adult who's working with the child develops and learns new skills, and and while they're developing their skills, they have the opportunity to support children and teach them and allow them to have plenty of time for practicing the skills that we're working on. So it ends up that the adult benefits, the child benefits. And if this child is in a setting where there are other children are also benefiting from this process. So it's very, very, very positive. We're going to watch a brief video in a few seconds on this coaching cycle. You'll see some young children in the video, but there are also some children who'll be turning 3 and starting preschool shortly. And what I'd like you to pay attention to, I'd like you to focus on what the therapists do with the parents, do with the adults, and kind of compare that with the direct instruction. So, and then we're going to be going into a short breakout room to kind of talk a little bit about what we observed. So any questions before we view the video? Are there any other contributions to what I've discussed about coaching? I think you'll get a better idea of it when you watch it in action in this video. So sit back and relax and watch what happens.
The field of early intervention is maturing. We are learning that when providers support and enhance the confidence and competence of parents and caregivers, it benefits the child's development. By building upon the family's everyday routines and activities, we can individualize early intervention supports and make them meaningful for that family and that child. A routines-based approach helps caregivers understand how to help the child learn and develop during natural activities. The caregiver then continually supports the child when a provider is not in the family's home. Let's listen now as 3 early interventionists share what this all looks like in practice.
Okay, you show me how you can do it all by yourself.
When I think of myself as a coach with a family, I want to be able to come into that home and sit with a family, get to know that family, get to know their routines, and then look at what can we do within that routine to help support that little one become more of a participant and more active.
So let's go get some chicken.
So when I'm working with a family and using coaching, I want to, engage with that family, interact with them, and understand what's happening during their routines throughout the day.
Is that yummy, yummy, yummy?
So that we can identify the routine and the times that they can best help their little person accomplish the goals, develop their skills, and be able to do optimally what we would like for them to do.
One more time.
I want to give them the tools and the education, the knowledge of what are the next steps that they're going to need in order to help their little one continue to do that same activity the next day or the next day.
Apples, eating an apple? Just like you.
Parents sometimes enter into the early intervention system with preconceived notions about what these services will look like. They are under the assumption that a provider will come in and work with their child, focusing on specific and isolated skills that the child may be missing. The caregiver may have been referred by a physician or another agency staff member who does not understand the shift from a clinical to a more routines-based approach. So how do you explain this to families?
When it comes to coaching, I oftentimes describe it as I'm going to be on the sidelines helping you know what are the next steps to take. And we're going to look at that together and identify the situation and go, what could we do next? What is he enjoying? What is he delighting in?
Son, it's time to clean up. You ready? The provider focuses on supporting every family where they are. This means that each family is looked at individually. Family priorities and uniqueness are celebrated and built upon. This is the starting point for the early interventionist.
Oh, sweetie. Well, one of the first things I do when I go into a home is I like to just go in and sit on the floor and look around at what they have and let the mom and the child initiate the activities. I like to see what they spontaneously and on their own pull out to show me. And I think that puts the mom and the child at ease for them to initiate the activities.
Which would you like? Do you want the truck or the book? Oh, the book.
I guess I also use a lot of turn taking. So I model what I do with those activities and then I say, okay, it's mom's turn. And I hand the toy over to mom and let her to, model what I just modeled for her.
See, what do you think? When parents have the opportunity to interact with the provider and observe new strategies or activities being used with the child, and then practice those same strategies while the provider offers support or suggestions, the parent gains experience so that he or she can continue using these strategies when the provider is not present.
All through the town. So when we use those natural environments and when we use those natural opportunities that are happening within the day-to-day moment or real time, and if we support the child or the parent in that moment during the week, when service providers are not within the home, that parent can reflect on that moment and say, you know what, I can do this. I'm competent. I am a facilitator for development for my child because it was a real life situation. And it's something that I can do and I can generalize it to another area of the child's life. And it empowers them. It makes them feel confident in their ability to create change.
You're laughing so good. You're losing your clothes.
We give you, again, those next steps, those tools, the information, the support that you need, and thereby he's getting much more intervention throughout the week than if we just bring in another person for 1 hour.
Can you pull? Pull.
I think that my focus has become much more family focused. Now it's more, what does the family want in their life and how do I help the family reach those goals?
They're not two separate skill sets.
If I want to promote what's valuable, my first role is to find out what are their expectations of that child and what do they want to be able to do with their child and what is a struggle for them in their day-to-day life, in the moment-to-moment. That's what's important to me.
Did you have a good time?
So it's much more of a shared responsibility. It's not the onus of the responsibility. Making that difference is not on my shoulder so squarely, but it's a shared responsibility. And I've empowered the parent and they have developed their confidence and their competence and they're able to explore what it is that they can do to help their little person and to make a difference in their lives. And then they can find the joy in making those differences.
Thank you. Thank you. Hugs.
This video has given you an inside look at 3 providers who have shared what their early intervention practices truly look like, how they engage the family, use coaching, and build on everyday routines and activities. Perhaps you are wondering how you can make these changes. Tune in to the 3rd segment of this video to help you get started.
Thank you, Mary, for putting a comment. I am unmuted. Okay, Mary, thank you for putting a comment into the chat because we are very overwhelmed by what has been going on with the pandemic and understanding that there are some silver linings. And one of the silver linings is what you referenced in the chat. And that is, using the parent. So if you want to just unmute yourself for a second and share with the group your comment.
Sure. So I'm a special education preschool teacher. And what we do, we have our students in school 4 days a week. On Wednesdays, it's all remote. We're doing remote classes right now or services with our students with IEPs only. So I have 3 students. And it's hard. It's like, honestly, the Mary Corrine show every Wednesday. And it's vastly different than being in person where I have no problem with people coming in my room. But to be on a screen, every child has to have at least one parent because the children are 4 years old and they can't manage their technology on their own. And it's always trying to come up with something that is developmentally appropriate, interesting, something that will grab their attention. We started with the Heggerty phoneme awareness yesterday. Actually, I introduced it. Today was day 2, and there's a lot of hand movements with that. And so I reached out to the parents and said, like, this is a team effort. Like at the end, I always have the kids pat themselves on the back and say, good job. And I told them each to pat their parents on the back and say it, because it really was a team effort to get the parents to understand, one, kind of what we were doing with the curriculum, and also having them to help their child to kind of manipulate their hands and then to do the sounds. But the interesting thing was I did some fine motor work with the kids today. And one of the moms was actually sitting right with her child. The child was sitting on her lap. So she was right behind the child, which is how we would always help assist a child if they were doing some writing. Another mom was sitting next to the child, but he's a lefty. So she was sitting on his right side and she was trying to kind of help him write, but she was like reaching across him and it was just really kind of awkward. And I saw it as a moment to say, like, to the other mom, great job sitting behind him. This is fabulous. And then this mom realized without me calling her out, and then she moved herself and then she was like, oh, I get it. And I can tell parents all day long, but until they see it in the moment. So I really think this is truly one of the benefits of having this pandemic is that we don't get the benefit of that from, like, we don't teach birth to 3. We don't go into the house. I don't think we have to go into the house, but I think for parents to hear the cues we're using, to see the way that we're structuring things. And it was just really, really positive. It was interesting because I wasn't even thinking about this meeting today. And I kind of was like, wow, it was a really good meeting. Like I did a lot of teaching today, not just of the kids, and it was very positive. So it was good. And I think it's well received by the parents too.
Okay, Mary, thank you for sharing that with us. And what you're talking about is you were experiencing a moment where you were supporting the adult. And so that really was a shift for you, but recognizing that that's where the power is. That is where the child is going to have the most opportunity to practice. We're going to go back one slide. Jean, could we just go back to the slide before this? Because one of our partners, Julie Giacone, just one more backwards, I think. Is that backwards?
Let me keep trying. It's not letting me go back. Oh. There we go. Okay. All right.
Okay. This is where we want to be. So, what we're describing around coaching can be invisible to people, not really knowing what we're doing until you're doing it and putting it into action. So my colleague, Julie Giacone, who's an early childhood specialist at CREC, has a process that she goes through with her teachers and how to begin to implement those practices that we were using in the classroom into the child's environment through a coaching lens. So Julie, would you mind sharing a little bit of the background on this and how you support this with the teachers?
Certainly, sure. Thank you very much. So basically it's about access, and as mentioned earlier, the environment's changed. I think we know early childhood curriculum includes the environment. Early childhood instruction includes the environment. And I commend Mary for getting those families together and having the parents engaged like that. I love to have parent engagement, but oftentimes we have parents that are not that available, are not that engaged. So, but we still have to deliver the service, especially when it comes to special education, speech and language services, OTPT. So what this does is this takes a look at what's going on in the home, or wherever the child sits, whether it's the home, grandma's house, a community-based preschool. What does that day look like? Okay, because we have our days in our preschool classrooms. We have morning entry. We have transition to whatever it is that you're going to do, whether it's a tabletop activity, whether it's books, and then there's a transition for cleanup, and then there's a transition to go to the rug. And that in and of itself, those routines, that's part of our curriculum. That's part of our instruction. These kids are learning as we're doing this through those routines, through those interactions. So for families, I work with staff to try to have a better understanding of what does it look like in that home or in that environment that the child sits. Because, for example, phonemic awareness, if I can somehow work with an adult, whatever adult's in that environment with the child, to have them better understand the importance of rhyme and how fun it is when kids play with words. So they're doing it throughout their entire day, from the time that the child wakes up and comes to breakfast. The child wants chips for lunch, for snack, and we talk about chips, and we talk about our lips, and we talk about, and having them understand that importance of, you get it through the entire day. You have adults that will embed it through the entire day. So we have these conversations with staff about what does it look like in your classroom. Let's think about what it looks like in the environment that the child's currently in, and how can I coach that adult and provide that adult with user-friendly strategies and tips that they can embed in their normal routine, as opposed to, because parents right now are like, I just can't take any more instruction. I cannot be my kid's teacher. I just can't. And I don't blame them, because they didn't sign up for this. But how much more powerful of a relationship can we build if parents are perceiving this as, so I don't have to become the teacher. These are just really great strategies that when we're, sitting watching TV, or as we're getting dressed in the morning, or as we are, taking a bath or brushing our teeth at night, these are things that we can incorporate right in there. Where does it make the most sense to incorporate that? And then I think meeting and having ongoing conversations with the families as much as possible through whatever means. I have some staff that have told me that they do the text messaging. Parents just would prefer text messaging as opposed to email. And there's a controversy about, okay, cell phone number, do you have a work cell phone, that type of thing. But they have found that in this crisis, text messaging has become a tool, a valuable tool. So, even if you're coaching through that instance and then getting feedback, what worked from the parent, what didn't work from the parent. And here's what's critical, I think, is we tend to look at, as teachers and as staff, I know what that IEP says, and I know what that kid needs, and I know what I need to do to deliver that. I think what we need to do is take a step back and realize that the child is learning every day. Take, for example, the child who turns around and closes the refrigerator door and says, "Someone get that damn dog out of my way," which is what my 2-year-old said to me when she was 2. She learned that. I didn't directly teach it to her, but she learned it in her environment. So kids are learning all the time. So think of, if we give these families these tools, we need to also find out what's not working in your environment. What are you struggling with the most? And if you can give in that home environment or in the community-based preschool tips and strategies for families or the adult, the caretaker, to use with those children in those times, you've got buy-in. You've got buy-in. And then you can move on to maybe some more complex strategies but we have to find out what's going on in that environment, because for right now, that's the learning environment. It's impossible to recreate our classrooms and our programs and our approaches virtually. It's especially at this level, it's just not possible. So we have to kind of get into their world, into their interactions, and then provide the adult with the tools necessary to get through the day, if that makes sense. But it's more powerful because when you look at access, if parents can, or the adult in the environment can use those rhyming strategies throughout the entire day, this is just one example, and really just embed it and have fun, and then, you know, talk about some books, make some books. Let's make some books together. You know, let's just play with words that you know, sound the same. That's really powerful, as opposed to you know, trying to, especially for families that are like, nope, I'm just not gonna, I can't teach my kid. I'm overloaded. So I hope that makes sense. I want to stop talking now, but I hope that makes sense as far as trying to, it's a huge paradigm shift, I'm not going to lie. And it is a huge release of control. And this is what I have teachers tell me, like, I'm not comfortable with that. The parent can't do what I can do. But you're increasing the capacity of the parent or the adult to embed throughout, just like Carol said in the beginning, natural learning contexts, natural occurring opportunities, to embed those pieces. That's how kids learn. They don't learn when we pull them off to the side and do a drill and skill type kill thing. They really, it's learned in context. And our kids who have IEPs, they're the ones really that need to learn it in the context, because they don't really generalize all that easily. So just, you know, the coaching piece is that we're talking about now is more relationship based, and it is shifting your focus to the adult to support the child, as opposed to coming into this virtual world thinking I'm going to be the one that delivers everything, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you very much, Julie. I think it's important for us as educators to remember and as you mentioned, role release, but also trusting the other adults in the child's life to be effective in supporting the children. I think, Jean, we're going to put there's a link to a document in the chat, or it's going in the chat. It's actually this document that Julie was just talking about. And so what we're going to do is break you into small groups, and I want you to spend probably about 7 or 8 minutes talking in your small group about how you might plan similar experiences in that home environment or in a childcare setting to accomplish the same goals as you might do in your classroom. So think about what that classroom activity is that you might plan, and then shift your thinking and brainstorm how you might plan and work with families or early childhood educators in community-based settings to provide the similar experiences. So I'm going to stop sharing and ask Jean to put us in breakout rooms with probably, I don't know, 4 people, 5 people for about 7 or 8 minutes. So in 3 minutes or less, how was it?
Didn't have time. I had so many Jessicas I needed to speak to in one little block. And I was listening to Kelsey, who was bringing up some really good points about synchronous learning, where you're live streaming your classroom. She was bringing up some really good points about the concern she has with that.
And it's funny you say that, because I had Jennifer in my group and I wanted to call her Jessica, so.
I'd like to just share a reflection from our group. And so special education teachers, being the owners of your classroom, we have a lot of responsibility. And part of that responsibility is supporting our paraprofessionals so that they know what we want them to do in the context of the classroom. So I think that's kind of a good example of you already coaching the adults that are in that environment when they're in the classroom, of being able to do that. And if your experience with paraprofessionals is similar to mine, we never get any planning time in order to do that. It happens within the context of the day and the activity that's going on. So we do have those skills. And now it's a question of, reflecting upon those skills and beginning to transfer those skills further into that child's environment, wherever that child is. Any other comments from groups?
I would like to hear Gwyneth. I was really thrilled with our group, and Gwyneth had some really great suggestions. So Gwyneth, do you want to share the couple of things that you're doing with the literacy book and with the potty training? Because I wish when my kids were little, I would have known about the potty charts.
I just shared that I work in Torrington. I am a special education teacher. I work in the AM with a collaborative Head Start classroom, and then in the PM I have a self-contained, and I have quite a few children that come that are not potty trained yet. They start at 3, and so I found I use the potty chart. They get a whatever it is they like. If they like rockets, dinosaurs, princesses, you just go into Google and you search in Google search potty chart, and it will pop up with these different things. And I was using it in the classroom and finding that one of my families really wasn't pushing. There's not a lot of background knowledge about parenting with this family. And they just said, well, she won't do it. And so while we were virtual, I was able to see exactly how she tantrums in the home. And so I saw that it was an opportunity to share with Dad, hey, I use this, let me send home a copy. And I have those little dollar store stamps. And for her, I just use a princess, and there's little hearts going down to a castle, and it's taped to the door, and every time she goes, she gets to stamp it. And then when she goes 3 times in a day, she gets to stamp her hand, which is woo, so exciting. And so I sent it home to Dad, because having seen her virtually, how she really tantrums to an escalated level at home, I thought, well, let's see if it works. And I got a text from Dad yesterday saying she was in big girl underwear all morning. So that was super exciting. And then for Read Aloud, one of the great things about virtual learning for me is actually reading the story and having the children listen and asking them questions, and the parents watching. And then when I would wrap up my read alouds at the end of my sessions every day, I would say, okay, so we read this story, Mom and Dad, it's going to be on my Google Classroom. Go in. You don't have to have the book at home. You can watch it with your children and then ask questions like I do. Or if you can go get it from the library, if you don't have it, then you can read it to them and ask them questions, and kind of just generating the concept of what reading aloud really is about. It's not just reading the pages on the book for a child to build those comprehension skills. So those are the 2 things I share with our group, and poor Rosie didn't even get a chance to share.
Thank you, Gwyneth. And so when we look at the coaching cycle, Gwyneth, you were modeling for the adult on what to do. So you actually may not have had in your mind that you were doing coaching, but you were providing it. And so it's important to have that reflection. And I know we're coming to the end of our time. We're at 4:31, and we really want to be respectful of all the work that you do and the time constraints that are on you. But this was wonderful. And you do have access to that template to be able to now to document that. and we'll continue to follow through on that. And I guess just the last thing that I want to leave you with, and I'll let Carol end, is that coaching really is a path. It's a path that connects school to where that child is, and it works both ways. It's a way of building relationships and building connections between home and school. So again, that's another, what we might say is a silver lining of how what we've learned in this time of the pandemic. So this is just
Judy, can I jump in for just a second? Because I just want to take a teachable moment. I'm
yeah.
just thinking, because progress monitoring and what Gwyneth just shared, think about the data, think about the information that was shared when she's in big girl pants all day. Think about the executive function, the self-regulation, following multiple step directions. I mean, in one text, what he told you, literally, I could put in dots, I could use for the IEP, but that's huge, and it's a huge celebration for the parents. So chances are, now that the parent's seen this win, there are so many other things that you can now build in through coaching to support that child in that environment.
So I think this is great. We've had some phenomenal discussions. I know our group had some great discussion. One of the things we talked about was how, you know, the video was terrific, and the frustration is that in that video, in typical times, we're out doing things like going to a restaurant and, you know, engaging with a family, getting lunch or whatever. And now we're not doing that. We're not, you know, families are a little bit housebound and getting frustrated with that. And so how do we keep things fresh and lively and exciting and new and different without being able to? What do you have, Julie?
So we talked about using what's in the environment. They're stuck home. They are stuck at home. Mm-hmm. These are just labels. So I did an activity with a group on just labels, and think it's culturally appropriate because depending on what they eat, what they use, it's their materials. And put these in a dark bag, and the children pull them out. You can make books with them. You can sort them. You can talk about phonemic awareness. You can talk about, so what are other things that start with, you know, I mean, there's a whole bunch of different things, and it's not just labels. I mean, I actually have like lids of things. There's a way to make, because we've used this in our correct, there's a way to make a baggy quilt, where we did an alphabet baggy quilt, and then the children actually sort, and the only thing you need are baggies and duct tape. But it's using what's in the home, and the kids get so excited about this. I know because I've got some kids in the neighborhood, and that's what we're doing.
That's awesome. So we do want to be respectful of your time, and we're going to leave you with a little self-reflection. We want you to think about how you will, moving forward, include the family and early childhood educators in community-based programs as part of the team. So that's your self-reflection to think on when you aren't sleeping tonight. And then our final slide is just some additional resources that you might find helpful. We will be sharing this PowerPoint with you all, and then everything will be posted on the various websites for you to access again. So there are the Early Childhood Coaching Handbook by Dathan Rush and Melissa Sheldon. That is the model that Birth to 3 is implementing. There's Coaching with Powerful Interactions, which is another great resource, along with some videos about coaching, practice-based coaching, embedding instruction into daily routines. There's just a lot of great resources here on this list. So, and the links should be live when you get the PowerPoint copy. So thank you for your time and your attention and your contributions today. We all have great ideas, and we appreciate your being here. And I think, Jean, you're going to send us in the follow-up email, there will be the document that we referenced. There will be a survey of next steps and the PowerPoint. Is that what I understand? All right. Does anybody else have any final comments? thank you again for being here.